Welcome to episode 3 of Digging in the WWE Vaults, where today we're going to talk WWE Raw, 17th, 1993. But we can't talk about Raw until we talk about up hard hydration. It's like your favorite drink and your favorite seltzer. Teamed up in the ring, won those titles, but are so much better than the sum of their parts. Dave, give him that tail of the tape.
Tail of the tape is, guys, it comes in an 8-pack with 4 great flavors: fruit punch, orange, lemon lime, and grape. And also, guys, it's a full flavored drink, but it's only 110 calories, low carb. So enjoy your new tag team partner, Game Up.
And what I really enjoyed is going back and watching these Raws. I love the opening segment, the opening video. This week, I believe, on Botchamania, and they probably do it most weeks on Botchamania, but their intro video mimics this time in Raw, and I really miss it. What I really liked about this Raw is I forgot that 2 big historic things happened on this. You know, typically I only remember the one, but we will get into that after we talk about our commentary team. You got Vince McMahon, Bobby Heenan, Macho Man. There's a Special Olympics feature at the beginning where Macho Man and the Smoking Guns were at this kind of Special Olympics event right outside the Manhattan Center. And, you know, for everything that can be said bad about the WWE, they have always been a big backer of the Special Olympics. And I like the way they were featured in this opening segment. What did you think?
Yeah, I mean, it's always nice to see that. But also, what I remember about this is when we will no longer see Rob Bartlett on the episodes. At some point, he dropped off, and, you know, it's Bobby and Macho here with Vince. And I kind of like the fact that at this point, I remember thinking, like, cool, now we get Bobby all the time.
Yeah, I'm not going to complain about losing Bartlett. And Vince, Bobby, and Macho talk about Razor having a match tonight. They don't mention against 2, and that will play later. Tatanka will be in action. There'll be a Shawn Michaels interview, and you have Kamala versus Yokozuna. And they go from this to Lord Alfred Hayes outside talking about what happened with Shawn Michaels and Mr. Perfect last week. And then it cuts to Lord Alfred Hayes live, and he mentions someone in disguise and it being a surprise for later. And once again, just these compact Raws. I like how they're setting up stories that pay off later, and it just brings me back to that time that I really enjoyed in WWF.
Yeah.
The first actual match of the show, very good match between the Smoking Guns and the team of Glenn Ruth and Tony Vaja. There's one name I gotta ask about because I feel like he went on to become a star later. Dave, who is Glenn Ruth?
Glenn Ruth is Headbanger Thrasher. He was part of the Headbangers in the 90s, and they would, of course, go on to be tag team champions.
After this, they played a commercial for WWF Mania, and I had talked about not remembering Mania. You had remembered it being like a Todd Pettengill vehicle, and Todd Pettengill just kind of giving the rundown of the show. And I'm gonna have to go and see if they have Mania episodes up on YouTube because, like I said, I didn't remember this show, but I remember Todd Pettengill around that time. And, you know, a little goofy, a little wild.
Oh, yeah.
And that's exactly what Vince and Macho and Bobby talked about in the segment after this. And they also mentioned a Tatanka versus Terry Taylor match on Mania. So interesting that they're hyping up the Saturday morning show here.
I forgot Terry Taylor had a little run at that point. I was thinking about later his opponent, someone with the last name Taylor, which we'll get to. But I'm like, oh, that's right. Terry Taylor had a small run, I think, as a wrestler with the company around that time.
Yes, and they went from the guys talking ringside to Vince McMahon in the ring interviewing Shawn Michaels. And Shawn is addressing why Mr. Perfect attacked him. Vince McMahon calls Michaels a reluctant fighting champion, which obviously gets Michaels to respond that he'll defend the title anywhere, anytime. And then we see a man in disguise at ringside hop into the ring. How did you like this segment and the reveal of Michael's opponent later on tonight?
I loved it. Totally nostalgia. I remember watching this, and I guess we can just say it, right? It's Marty Jannetty. It's the Rockers. Yeah, I remember this segment, and I thought it was really cool. I didn't know as much behind the scenes back then, mind you, too. So I didn't know Marty had probably already been fired once or, you know, back again, or who knows what was going on with Marty. But I was very excited to see Marty Jannetty because I knew he had been missing, and just to see him pop up here, especially when we saw Perfect and Michaels get into it earlier, it was like, oh, you know, like, wait, we got Sean versus Marty now. So really cool segment, especially during this time period. We didn't get a ton of stuff like that.
Yeah, and I was wondering, like, Marty had to have been returning from a firing here, right? I can't remember exactly what it was around this time, but he definitely came in. He had that, like, attitude and way he carried about himself that it was almost like a second chance for him.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, he was on point here. And it was great to see the match get made for later in the event because I thought the biggest thing that had happened on this was Razor Ramon versus the Kid.
Yeah.
They talk about how the Kid's name's been changing.
Oh, yeah.
He didn't have like a set WWE name at this time.
Right.
And this is famous for Kid getting the upset over Razor Ramon. The match that would you arguably say made his career?
Oh, 100%. Yeah, there's really no doubt that this is what made his career. He would go on to have a very memorable career and be part of DX and part of the NWO. And he had a great match in this era with Bret Hart. And he also had a tag title run probably around this year too, briefly with Marty Jannetty. We'll talk about again later. So he had a great career, but this is what kicked it all off. I think so he still had El Kid, which was Lightning Kid, on his tights here. And I think he wrestled 1 week as the Cannonball Kid. He got destroyed like 2 weeks in a row. And this never happened in WWE back then. We didn't have a random enhancement guy just be a top star like Razor Ramon. This was unheard of. So this was huge. I saw Sean Waltman first. Before this, I was lucky to see him in Global Wrestling Federation as the Lightning Kid. He had great matches, but was small. And even then, not being as smart to the business, I thought, oh, this guy will probably never be, a major star because he's smaller. But he had great matches, especially with another guy named Jerry Lynn at that time in that company. But yeah, this was huge. And I don't think this is one of those most memorable moments of all time with Monday Night Raw, even still.
Yeah, I remembered watching this match. I remember being in shock that he got the win. And we talked about how much it did for him. This match was followed up by another star versus another future star as the undefeated Tatanka takes on Scott Taylor.
Yeah.
And I had a question mark in my notes until they mentioned that Scott Taylor is from Maine.
All right.
And then that had me, obviously, it had to be Scotty 2 Hotty. It was a great match. I really popped for seeing Glenn Ruth before he became a member of the roster, seeing Scott Taylor before he became a member of the roster. Same with the 1, 2, 3 Kid, Lightning Kid. There's a lot of guys that wrestled almost as enhancement type talents that went on to become stars. So
absolutely,
I like how you're seeing that pipeline here. It's not just an enhancement talent that's going to keep that same position. What was your reaction when you saw Scott Taylor?
That is cool. That's one of the reasons I like going back to watch these is seeing guys like this, like Glenn Ruth, like Scotty Taylor, and go, oh wow, that's right. They were enhancement guys at one point and they turned it around. They got different gimmicks. And that's what was so big about the Kid is he didn't really get a different gimmick. He got squashed 2 weeks in a row and then pulled off this major upset. Now, the thing with Scotty Taylor, though, that's interesting, I'm thinking about now, is like no disrespect to Tatanka, who had a great run here at this time. But you could argue that Scotty Taylor here, who's the enhancement guy, probably ended up to go on to have the better career of the two.
Oh, definitely by far. I was at this time, though, Tatanka was a big deal coming in, and he looked like a monster against Scott Taylor.
Right.
They were also really selling during this match, still, the shock of that Razor loss. That goes on for a little bit because you talked about loving seeing the future enhancement talent in these matches. And I don't know if it's just the podcaster in me or like the TV nerd, but I really like the Mean Gene King of the Ring reports. He starts by selling the Kid victory, selling the surprise about Sean and Marty, that match being made, and then goes on to talk about King of the Ring. It's from Dayton, Ohio, Sunday, June 13th, the first ever King of the Ring. This is a big King of the Ring because you got Hulk Hogan versus Yokozuna for that championship. You got King of the Ring matches, Bret Hart versus Razor Ramon, Jim Duggan versus Bam Bam Bigelow, Lex Luger versus Tatanka. And then the thing that I loved possibly even more, and this is just what a nerd I am for this, you had a Shawn Michaels versus Crush match announced as a King of the Ring qualifier for WWF Superstars. You had Kamala versus Mr. Hughes, a King of the Ring spring qualifier.
Yes.
Mentioned for WWF Wrestling Challenge. So this just has me looking forward to these matches, all over again, wanting to go find these different programs to kind of relive that Saturday, Sunday morning wrestling that I remember as a preteen back then.
So one thing before we jump out of the segment, Mean Gene, it's funny you brought him up here because I'm looking at my phone because it heard to me. I'm like, this is 93 and King of the Ring would have been around June. And I'm like, I think I just got done watching Bobby Heenan show up at WCW at the Clash in January of 94. And Gene was already there. So I'm like, when did he show up? November of 93. Gene will debut for WCW.
Wow, that's wild to think because Bobby Heenan and Mean Gene were such a fixture of WWF for so long. And that's kind of hilarious because we grew up with WWF, so they were our centerpieces. But for anybody older than us, they remember Gene, and remind me, was Bobby in AWA before this as well?
Oh, so much earlier. Yeah, Bobby and Gene were AWA. Gosh, I wouldn't be surprised. This is 93. I wouldn't be surprised if Bobby and Gene were in AWA in 83. I'd have to go look, but I feel like they both came over around 84.
I was going to say, I felt like it was, probably a decade earlier. So it was a great run. They made up the majority of what we remembered as the WWF. They went from this King of the Ring report to Macho Vince and Bobby, and there's talk about Sherry being a guest and how much she loved Bobby, and I was just loving the back and forth here. We've been saying it time and time again for these episodes. Just really gave me that nostalgia feel, and even more than the nostalgia I got from the back and forth between these guys, they had the Alfred Hayes talk about cutting to promotional content, and we had a Tatanka Ico Pro video. We had a Macho Man Slim Jim commercial, and just great nostalgia for them. But one of the biggest matches on this card, I popped huge for this because seeing what else was involved, when I saw we were getting Kamala versus Yokozuna, this was awesome because it was just two big men colliding in the ring, a real hoss fight, not a super long match, but I thought a very fun match.
Well, I mean, this is Yoko on his rise up. This is Kamala, more towards the end of his WWF run, but I thought it was cool because this was a match I did not remember on this show. Obviously, with the kid upset, that I always remembered. I still remember the main event, but this got away from me, and I'm like, whoa, this match happened? This feels like a match you wouldn't have thought happened, and then to see it did, pretty cool.
Yeah, and these are the matches I love coming upon because there's some that you're going to remember, and then there's going to be like a match in the middle that you're just going to be like, whoa, I forgot about this, and it's fun to watch. After Yokozuna got the win, there was a brief commercial for All-American Wrestling, and they almost talked about it like Bobby and Gene went around America. And was that a feature of this show, do you remember? Were they featuring different things from different cities?
I don't recall that, but I do remember them once in a while being in some cities. I don't know if that was a weekly thing. It might have been the idea. It might not have happened all the time.
Following this, we cut back to Macho Vince and Bobby. There's more talk about Sherry, just continuing one of those storylines. It was fun. It was goofy. But I'll tell you what was not goofy was this main event. Shawn Michaels versus Marty Jannetty. I got to admit, I didn't remember the outcome necessarily. Like after I saw it, I remembered it happened, but I was just watching this match because I was thinking how good Marty was looking in the ring, how this must have been coming back from a fire, and just how massive this match was. And then you've got Mr. Perfect coming out, backing down Shawn Michaels, throwing the towel in his face. And it was just the perfect opportunity for Marty to get the win. I popped huge. This was a great main event. And this is another one of those reasons why I love covering these old episodes. There's certain things you remember. There's certain things that surprise you.
Yeah.
And this was just a huge match for Monday Night Raw.
I wish I took it down in my notes, but I'm looking at this now too. And I think that's Bill Alfonso, who's the referee here.
I actually have that in my notes as a question mark.
Because he did referee around this time for WWF. So he refereed for WWF.
Yeah, he had a big run as a WWE ref, which was great.
Same with you, Joe. Just want to say, seeing Perfect come down, throw the towel towel on him. I didn't forget, and I even wrote in my notes that at times I almost forget how truly good Marty Jannetty was at this time, because Sean would go on to have this amazing career, and he was so good. But man, Marty, if he could have just got a hold of his demons, wow, this guy could have had a really his career could have probably gone even further.
I know that's one of the biggest shames of Jannetty's career, because you hear back to the early Rockers days how when they started off, like Sean looked up to him and how he was once considered the bigger talent. And you said everything got away from him. And even though he still wrestled up until a few years ago, his star did not quite shine as bright as Sean's. And I mean, it's the reason he got a Dark Side of the Ring episode. It really is a shame. But this match really showcased how great Jannetty is in the ring. And if you're talking about greatness, you got to be talking about Game Up Hard Hydration.
If you haven't tried Game Up, then you are missing out. Imagine your favorite seltzer and your favorite sports drink had a baby, but it's way better than that. Each can is 110 calories, low carb, 4.9 ABV. It's a nice light drink that is not light on flavor. Game Up comes in fruit punch, orange, lemon, lime, and grape. Pick it up at drinkgameup.com or at your nearest liquor store.